course. Thank you for listening.
So us ordinary folks, can you lay it on us? A few do's and don'ts in terms of as we're in the middle of, say, a medium to large organization, not at the top, not at the bottom. We're just sort of making our way in terms of career. What are the top things you recommend people do and don't do to really develop and move quickly?
I love this question. I think 3 things come to mind. If you're mid in your organization, there can be a really important mindset shift that you can make. And this is the way that you put yourself back in the driver's seat of your career. A lot of us feel very disrupted coming out of the pandemic. Opportunities might seem to have disappeared. Everything got turned upside down. So these steps are particularly relevant for this moment in time. And the first is to be very clear with yourself. What do you want out of this next stage in your career? What do you want to learn? What expertise do you want to become known for? What teams do you want to learn how to lead or projects? What is your specialization? How are people going to recommend you for jobs in the future? And so first you have to have that conversation with yourself and be very clear on that. And then second is then share that with your mentors and sponsors within work. So have that conversation with your manager of, this is where my skill set lies, my interests, my goals, my talents are here. I would love your ideas of ways that I can utilize that or expand my influence on this team. The way you get a yes to that is one, expressing your interests and helping them know how you're trying to evolve. And second is what I call creating a win-win-win. The first part is that conversation you had with yourself of what do you want in exchange for your very hard work every day. 2 is look at your manager's responsibilities and see what she or he has been tasked to do within the team on the big bet of the company. If you can allow her to delegate something to you, that frees her up to have bigger impact and look good in front of her boss, and that gives you an opportunity to grow into that area. And then the third element of that win-win-win is understanding what are the primary goals and objectives of the company right now, and how can I align myself with where the company, the skill set, the reputation, the energy, the relentlessness that they might need, and how can I exemplify that? When those 3 things are in place, you're going to get yes every time. Even if the project you want to work on is outside your job description or your current seniority, that's a great way to open a door for yourself. So that's, I think, element number 1 for my fellow entrepreneurs out there. Number 2, I think, is seeking out leaders that you not only like, but you want to become like. Now, not every manager is worthy of this. I can appreciate, especially early in your career, you might be working for someone whose leadership style you don't want to emulate in the future. If that's true, maybe look for an opportunity to have a cross-functional project or work on something outside your team. Or if that's not even available to you within your organization, maybe volunteering in the community and seeking out a leader who is exemplifying the way you want to manage a team, or is really good under pressure, or is able to exemplify some of those habits that you hope to have in the future. So surrounding yourself with the best people possible, especially among the leaders you're working for. And then I would say the third that comes to mind is proactively disrupting yourself. What I mean by this is create a checklist for yourself where you're expanding your skills, your expertise, and you're up-leveling very consistently before the market or your team or your manager can do it for you. And that goes back to point number 1, which is knowing exactly what you want out of this phase in your career and finding a place where your team, your company's goals are aligned with that. I think if those 3 things are in place, entrepreneurs can feel extremely empowered rather than passive and reactive to the assignments they're given. And that feels really, really good, especially in this moment in time when we're all craving that feeling again.
And so I'd love it if you could give us some example articulations of being precise with what you want. Because I'm imagining I want to kind of be better at Excel. May not quite be what you're imagining or suggesting when you say be really clear on what you want. Could we hear some sample articulations?
So I actually did this exercise for myself when I left Google after 12 years and decided to found my own company. I sat down to write my mission, vision, and value statements, as many do as part of your business planning. And I found that exercise to be a little bit exhausting. I learned this from Jeff Bezos, actually. Jeff really doubled down on creating very clear leadership principles for his entire team because really important decisions were being made in rooms that he no longer could be in. He just had to replicate his thought process across the company as fast as possible. So I saw him work with 3 of his SVPs to draft the now famous Amazon leadership principles. At the time, there were 10. Then it became 14, and now there's 16 with Andy Jassy as the CEO. And I encourage you to do that even as an entrepreneur. You don't have to be in your garage starting something with your computer or going to, Silicon Valley and looking for venture capital funds. I really encourage you to do this for your own life and career. And first, it starts with that mission statement. What is the reputation or the living legacy I want to be leaving right now? Now, whenever I propose that to a client, they feel a little overwhelmed, especially if they're early in their career, thinking about legacy. But I think it's a nice clarifying question to be like, what do I want in exchange for this? My career in tech has been intense. I definitely worked really long days. There were periods of time I was working 18 hours a day and every weekend. And I didn't burn out because one thing was true. I knew exactly what I wanted in exchange for my very hard work. I was willing to have that be a very high bar. I worked incredibly hard, but I knew what I wanted in return. So that's what I wanted to learn, who I wanted to become, and these stages on which I wanted to stand in the future. And so I think in writing your mission statement, think about that. Who do you want to be serving? Why is that you? What about your background, your talents, your desires, your drive makes you uniquely qualified to get there? And then surround yourself with the very best people who can supplement any weaknesses or lack of experience that you might have. Does that answer it?
Yeah, I hear the importance. Yeah, that makes sense. If you got that kind of clarity there, then you can have that sense of purpose, that mojo, that motivation, that inspiration to persist in those intense times. So that totally checks out. The articulation then is not merely one sentence, but rather pretty detailed in terms of we've got a mission, we got a vision, we got some values. Can you give us some examples of what those could sound like?
Sure. So at the moment, my mission statement is that I am here to discover and empower underrepresented entrepreneurs through actionable education and mentorship. Now, the first word in that statement was the last one I added, because at first it was just to empower underrepresented entrepreneurs through actionable education and mentorship. But I realized that a lot of people were not yet self-identifying as an entrepreneur. They're like, well, I'm early in my career or I'm mid-level manager. And so I really wanted to wake that up in people and help them discover it. I wanted to seek them out where they were right now as someone trying to get that big first promotion or, own the dream client. I wanted to wake that up in them. Now, the reason that mission statement was important for me to evolve, it really took quite a lot of heads down work and testing it. But it's important because it helps me know what projects to say yes to now. It helps me, if I have limited number of time, I know I'm going to prioritize an underrepresented entrepreneur over someone that I feel is already well served. If it's an opportunity to help someone discover their inner entrepreneur, I'm going to say yes to that, for example. So what you really want is your mission statement to be specific and time bound. What do I want to deliver right now? And I think that's really helped me show up in the right way. When I first started my company, I had to try out a bunch of things and learn the hard way of what I was and wasn't good at, what excited me, who I was best suited to serve. What did that look like? What stage in their growth are they? So it took a lot of experimentation. So don't think that just sitting down for 30 minutes is going to be one and done with this mission statement, but you have an effective one when it allows you to make much clearer decisions and show up in the right way that is rewarding and exciting to you rather than draining and diminishing.
And how about vision?
So my vision is more about what am I putting into the world? Am I going to say yes to just the highest paying project? For me, I really want to be mission aligned with you. I want to be working for me in my consulting business. I want to work for entrepreneurs who are making a change I too want to see in the world. I'm very attracted to anything around climate change, anything about empowering new generations of entrepreneurs or expanding education opportunities. So that gives me kind of a checklist in my head, because there's a lot of places you can show up in the world. And I really am value aligned with that. And I find that if I'm working on a project, for example, I have a friend who started an incredible SaaS company, software as a service company. And I think he's amazing. And I've done a little bit of like helpful advice and coffee chats with him, but it doesn't wake me up. I'm much more excited to be working on mycelium based protein alternatives because I think that's important for the future world that I want to create. So it's often in the decisions choosing between good and good, I think are a lot harder than the good and the bad. And having a really clear purpose statement helps me show up in ways that are most meaningful to me.
Okay. And let's hear some values.
So my values are who I want to be and who I want to surround myself with. So for me, especially coming out of Silicon Valley, I really drank the Kool-Aid. I am excited by people who are big thinkers and big dreamers. My values are people who want to live up to what is now a cliche of Silicon Valley of making the world a better place. I value being around people who are insatiably curious and smart and collaborative and kind, who aren't competitive in the negative sense, but showing up in a very resilient, passionate way. And so my values circle around the types of people I want to surround myself with through my work and through my consulting.
So tell us, is there anything in the realm of resilience or self-care or support systems that you recommend that can make all the difference when you're playing a bigger game with a bigger set of pressures on you?
I'm going to answer that in two different ways, but I promise they're connected. So in order for me, as by nature, a timid, cautious, perfectionist person, that is the nature with which I was born. I am a perfectionist in all the negative definitions of that. Like I'm afraid of starting something without being 100% sure that I can do it perfectly. That would have led to a very small life had I not been nurtured out of that by this crazy environment I found myself in tech. One of the most pivotal moments in my life, a sliding door moment for me, was discovering Carol Dweck's book called Mindset. And even if you only read the introduction, I think it could change a lot of people's lives. In the introduction, she introduces the premise that there are two different mindsets. There's the learning mindset and there's the performance mindset. As a perfectionist, I was in the performance mindset. I was not consciously thinking this, but I was assuming that I was born with a certain set of skills and abilities, and anything that went beyond that would just discover and out me for all my imperfections. That's a performance mindset, right? You want to know you can get 100% on everything you try. Now, if you're in a learning mindset, you're of the mindset that you, with extra effort and time and practice, can increase your abilities. That if you try something the first time and you get 80 out of 100, then the next time you'll be better informed and learn from your mistakes and you'll get 85 and progressively can increase your skills. I don't know. That was such a light bulb moment for me to be like, oh, if I am uncovered, this is where imposter syndrome comes from. And you hold yourself back if you're worried that if they discover that I can't yet do this, that means I never can and they won't trust me anymore. So being nurtured out of that really helped me with that resilience of, because I failed now, I am equipped with tools that I did not have in my tool belt before. And I'm going to be able to show up smarter, stronger, and better for it after that. And so I think resilience is much more first about your internal mindset. And then the second way I'm going to answer it is in seeking out those teams. I was very privileged to work in companies that not only rewarded that behavior, they demanded it. So I want to acknowledge that not all families, not all communities, not all companies are embracing of this. But if you can seek out a community of like-minded people where you have that psychological safety to experiment and to try some things and learn to trust yourself, that's when work gets really, really fun. In fact, I'm training for a half marathon right now. I've run a few before, but that was pre-pandemic and I am not the same person I was then. So I've got this Peloton trainer I listen to while I'm running. And she just said on my run yesterday something that's super resonates around this resilience. She said, you can't push yourself until you trust yourself. So start with that internal work first and know, like, I can do that one more step. I will be stronger tomorrow than I was today because I showed up in this way. And so I think those two elements need to be there. Trusting yourself and then being in an environment that rewards, supports, and encourages that.
It sounds like a lot of the work is kind of just foundational in establishing, okay, the mission, the vision, the values, strengths. What am I good at? What am I going for? What specifically do I want in this role? And then thinking about some daily habits and practices. What do you recommend when we zoom in at that level to be some key do's and don'ts for professionals?
I think my first thought is around this element of curiosity. So all of the incredible, super performing CEOs I've worked for displayed this in kind of Olympic levels of curiosity. For Jeff Bezos, he did a quarterly thinking retreat. Not all of us have the freedom to do what I'm about to describe. I will translate this for us normal people. But what he did was for 1 week, every single quarter, he would lock himself into a hotel room away from his family, from work, from everything, and removed all external stimulus. No newspapers, no phone, no conversations, no nothing. And he would just starve himself of external influences. And then the second half of the week, the only thing he brought with him was a blank Moleskine notebook. And those notebooks are full of ideas. I literally see them launching today. That's how forward thinking he was in those moments. Now, most of us don't have the freedom to take an entire week off just to think and sit in a room and dream up the future. So the way that I've tried to adopt that for myself is in the middle of my career, when I was already working very, very long days, I realized that I needed to take good care of my mental and my physical health to be able to not only survive, but thrive in those very intense environments. It was important to prioritize that. So I started having non-negotiables with my teams or with my boss. And so, for example, I started working out with a trainer for the first time in my whole life. It was so hard in the beginning, but I had this protected hour from 7 to 8 a.m. every single day. My phone was not with me. Now, I was working at Google at the time, so my gym was literally in the first floor of the building that I worked in. And so I said, okay, if you actually need me, send my assistant down to get me. And in the 9 years that I kept that practice of taking care of my physical health first before I got to my desk, there were only 3 times when my assistant had to come down and ask me to come up. So that really showed me that I can give myself permission to do this hour. The world's not going to fall apart if I take care of myself first. And I think building in that type of resilience and prioritizing, and especially now, I'm really, as an entrepreneur, I'm really trying to focus also on my mental health of giving myself that space to think. And that's another way I've translated what Jeff's practice of these thinking retreats and being really curious is now I have these protected hours every day where I am just reading, reflecting, writing, consuming, because so much of consulting is giving. And I need to replenish my expertise and my knowledge and just give my brain that space to be creative and to be a connector. So that's one of many, many like Olympic practices that I've tried to translate into my work and life.
And so whether we are spending an hour or a week in this rampant ideation, this sounds like a blast to me. I like that sort of thing. Creative zone. Well, one practice is blocking out stuff, although it sounds like in your world, you are letting in particular things. So maybe can you zoom in a little bit, like what are we doing? We're just sort of sitting there like, right. Are there any like key question prompts or initial fodder or reading materials that get things going here?
I think your instinct is right. This absolutely needs to be dialed in for each individual. So the way in which you kind of fill yourself back up in order to give what's required at home and with your family and at work, I think that's unique to the individual. So for me, because my work is in giving advice and also having this international breadth of understanding of where tech is moving in the world right now, my clients really need me to have that kind of global perspective. I can't do that without having time to consume all the information. So one for me is just personally, I love to read. I love to listen to podcasts. I love hearing and being exposed to some of the greatest thinkers in the world. So in and of itself, even if that wasn't directly demanded of me from my job, I would be doing that anyway. So that's something that fills me up. Even if I'm not reading something for work, I just know that makes me happy. The second thing is I know I need sunshine. I grew up in Seattle most of my life. I did not have that daily dose of sunshine. The second I moved to California for grad school, and now I live in Spain, I know that is just like instant happiness for me. So if I get outside in fresh air and get some sunshine on my face, that's an instant mood boost for me. Each person's going to be a little bit different. I know I'll have a good day if I've moved my body, if I've filled my mind, and if I got outside in nature. For each person, that's different. Like maybe it's playing with your kids or your dog. Maybe it is in a creative pursuit. You need to paint or create something with your hands. So ask yourself, what for me, even when I am working on it really, really hard and I remain far away from the finish line of whatever goal it is I'm working on, I finish the day feeling like I have been filled up rather than drained. So I think those types of pursuits are always things you want to be seeking out. Like even if you're not perfect at it, maybe you're training for a marathon like I am right now. And trust me, I'm horrible. I'm not doing this because I have any hope of winning anything. Hopefully maybe a PR. Just think about that, about what fills you up and fills you with joy, regardless of the outcome. You don't want to be measuring those rejuvenation periods on the same scale as you are with your work or performance.
And then I'm curious. So let's say you're doing all these things and you're just rocking and rolling, delivering value all over the place. And it seems like, unfortunately, the meritocratic forces in your organization are broken. It's like, oh, you can't be promoted until someone dies or moves to another role. And they're probably not going to do that for 6 years. How do you think about that when you're there?
Been there, done that. I absolutely know that struggle intimately. As I mentioned, I worked at Google for 12 years. So it was really on me to have to reinvent myself. And I tended to do it in kind of 3-year cycles. I would be challenged in the beginning and learning a lot. Then I'd get into my zone of genius and start doing it really well. And then after that, I would start to get the itch of like, what's next? And nobody, even at a company as innovative and driven as Google, nobody ever came to me once and said, oh, hey, Anne, I've noticed you've had this untapped talent or interest, and I've been thinking about how to apply it. That just doesn't happen. That's your job. So I think it comes back to having that conversation with yourself and knowing exactly what you want to go for. So after about, 6 years at Google, so halfway through my tenure there, I had this idea for a role that I think would really elevate not only my work, but the work of my manager, who at the time was Eric Schmidt, the CEO. And I had seen, we were doing a lot of policy work at the time, and I had seen this role of chief of staff in government, at the White House, in military, for example. And I thought, that is what he needs. I had been this business partner for him. I had been kind of a thought leader with him. I was kind of that safe space for him to debate ideas. I thought, if I could take my job to the next level, it would look like chief of staff. Eric thought it was a good idea, had me brainstorm, write the job description. I took it to HR, and it literally took me 3 years to fully realize what I wanted in that job. And so in the end, I was the very first chief of staff at Google ever. And now it's pervasive throughout tech and now moving beyond that. But I can tell you right now, I had a conversation, in fact, with my HR rep the day I left for Christmas holidays. And it made me cry because she basically was just squashed it and said, if you want that type of thing, you might want to consider looking elsewhere. And I wasn't ready to do that yet. But then eventually I moved on. So I've had those really hard conversations, but I think it comes back to that knowing what you want, seeing how that solves a problem for your manager and proving how that's best for the company. In the end, either you're going to get it, which I did after a couple of years fight, and then eventually I needed to move on in order to have the kind of growth that I wanted. So I can feel both of that. Sometimes it's wait and work really hard and prove yourself. And then eventually sometimes the answer is that growth opportunity might lay elsewhere.
Okay. Well, so that's a nice perspective. It may take some time or it may be hopeless. Any tips on how we can tell the difference sooner rather than later?
I think I pursued it for 3 years because I did see progress and I became more and more convinced of the value of it. What I ended up doing that sealed the deal in the end was I said, how about we do an experiment? Let's not make it official, but of the job description that I've outlined with this delegated authority level, with this type of responsibilities, with this skill set, I'm going to act like I already have this title in this job, which took a bit of buy-in from my peers because a big part of being chief of staff is acting as a surrogate, as a delegate of your executive. And for me to represent Eric Schmidt in rooms he wasn't in is a big deal. And I needed his senior reports to kind of treat me accordingly. Luckily, I had worked with all of them for more than a decade, and I had that trust factor with them already. They knew that time with me would make their jobs better. And so I got that kind of peer buy-in that was essential. Had I not had those relationships of trust already established, I don't think I could have converted on it. But agreeing to do that 6-month trial and then inviting extreme critique from all of those people I'd worked for and got a 360 performance evaluation from them was the proof that they needed that this actually did. I think one of them described 10xing our output by having me be able to represent him in more rooms.